I don't really know why I had never seen All Is Bright. This is also called Almost Christmas, and I'm a huge fan of Christmas films. I love Paul Rudd, but for whatever reason, I never saw this. I have now seen it, and I can confirm it definitely wasn't the wait. I found this to be tedious, boring, the characters were unlikable. There is one aspect that I liked, maybe two, and I'll talk about those in a moment. This was released in 2013, it's directed by Phil Morrison and written by Melissa James Gibson, and of course it stars Paul Rudd and Paul Giamatti as Rene and Dennis. And the narrative sounded like it could be interesting. Dennis has recently been released on parole, and he is trying to sell Christmas trees with his friend Rene. And it's all about, well, in theory, it's about the emotional journey that they go on. And there are times when it seems like Dennis is still nothing but a criminal. There are times when it's like he's trying to do the right thing. And as a character, I didn't like him, but I thought he was well written. I thought he was a very complex, believable, realistic character, but I found him to be very boring, which sounds contradictory. But hopefully you'll know what I mean by that. You can be complex without being interesting. And with regards to Rene, Paul Rudd's character, no problem with anybody's performance at all. And I always love watching Paul Rudd perform. But Rene was just even more boring than Dennis. I don't think he had anywhere near as much substance. He wasn't as interesting. I just didn't care for either of the protagonists at all. That would be fine if the narrative itself was interesting. But it wasn't. Not a lot happens. It is incredibly slow. It's just under 2 hours. I think it's about an hour and 40 something. And honestly, not a lot happens. And as I said, it does try to be emotional. It does seem like it could be an emotional journey. And there were a couple of occasions where I felt quite strong, usually negative emotions at the characters' situations. There were times when I wanted the best for them. But those moments were so few and far between that it's just such a depressing film with very few uplifting moments. The journey is so dire, and visually, there's nothing exciting about this. The locations are fine. We have some gorgeous houses, actually. We get to see some nice houses. But in general, the scenes are just really dull to look at. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of colour. There's not a lot of excitement. And obviously that would be okay. Not every film needs to have a bright colour palette, and not every Christmas film needs to be full of twinkling lights at every corner. And that would be okay if the characters were interesting, if the narrative was interesting, but it's not really ticking any other boxes apart from one, which I'll talk about in a moment. So visually, it's boring. The characters are dull, which is strange because, as I said, Dennis does seem like quite a complex, realistic character, but I didn't like him. He was less dull than Rene, but neither of them I enjoyed. And then we have, of course, the narrative, which is just, could have been good, but it's tremendously slow and nothing really happens. The box that it does tick is the music. I love the music. Sometimes the music is quite upbeat and quite happy, sometimes not so much, but I think they did a really great job with the music for this. With regards to the Christmas aspect, it definitely isn't the most Christmassy Christmas film, and considering they're selling Christmas trees, that maybe came as a bit of a surprise. That being said, it's not one of those films where I think it could have been set any time of year. There are plenty of Christmas films, so-called Christmas films, where they whack Christmas in the title, but there's next to no Christmas, and they could have done it any month of the year. Actually, with this one, I think the Christmas aspect does work really well for the narrative. I think they made the right choice to set it during Christmas. I don't think what we got would have worked in any other time of year. I mean, it might have done, but I think the right decision was made there, even though it's not the most Christmassy. The Christmas music, though, I quite like. So, do I recommend it? I don't, and I'm really upset by that because I really like Paul Rudd. I really love Christmas films. The narrative sounded like it could have been a really fascinating, emotional journey, and it just wasn't. The performances are fine. The music is great. Other than that, there's not a lot of praise. Dennis as a character, I think, is well written, but he's still not that interesting, which, as I said, does sound contradictory. But if you watch it and you agree with that, please let me know. I hope that makes sense. I'm not really going to say that it was worth the 11-year wait, almost 11-year wait that it took me to watch this. But I guess I'm pleased to say I've finally seen it, so I can tick it off of my list. If you're particularly a huge fan of Paul Rudd or Paul Giamatti, and for whatever reason you haven't seen it, sure, give it a go. It is watchable, but it's not interesting. And that's a bit of a shame. So it's not amazing by far. A couple of good moments in it. The music is very good. But in general, All is Bright or Almost Christmas definitely didn't work for me.